How about a hand for Jacob? And Ben and John, you know, all the people, you know, moving furniture around up here. So, yo, Ben, why do I feel like the voice of God? How about this? Any better? Yeah, okay. Any of you know a living legend? I know one. Marty Moscow-Wayne. So I think some of you may know, hopefully all of you will know before the evening is out, Marty is one remarkable media producer, executive, professional, and human being. She came, I believe, to WHYY in 1983, right after the Civil War, and distinguished herself as a host of a program that we still nationally distribute called Fresh Air. She started what I think is still one of the nation's finest, if not only, radio program with Dr. Dan Gottlieb called Voices in the Family on behavioral health issues. For several decades until recently, Marty was the host and executive producer of Radio Times with Marty Moscow-Wayne, and she is now producing a weekly show called The Connections. I will allow Marty to introduce you all to her special guest for this evening, and I also want to thank you again for participating in this audience this evening to help Marty, you know, create a Connections episode out of the discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's not Bryce Harper, but it is Marty Moscow-Wayne.
Thank you, Bill, and good evening. Thank you for coming out, and thank you for all you do, you caregivers. This is the third time I have seen this, and I've cried every time, just because I'm a crybaby, but it's just so moving to see and hear people who are giving that kind of direct care. There is an echo here. I'm hoping that can be fixed, but I'll just keep talking. And on a personal note, as Bill said, and this really taps into memories, my parents died more than 20 years ago, and I still, I'll just keep talking, and I still remember and fondly the people that cared for them, either at home or in the hospital or whatever care that they needed. And to this day, I'm just moved by the love that they expressed for my parents that they didn't know. And I have a sibling who raised a child with a really serious disability, lived with my sister for 30, 40 years and was severely compromised. And I saw what my sister's life was like, basically keeping this child alive. So this is a very, very moving time and conversation, and certainly film as well. And I think we do overuse the word crisis, but I think when we're talking about caregiving, it really fits. It really does apply. As Rosalind Carter said so beautifully and so wisely, we're either going to be giving it or receiving it or some version of that at some point in our life. And just to underscore some of the things that came out in the film, 50 million family caregivers provide unpaid care for their family members and for their friends, and if they were paid, it would be $600 billion a year. And as we just saw, there are 5 million children and teenagers who provide care for their family members. I read that this is from the AARP, caregivers spend an average of $7,200 annually to cover medical expenses. So there are obviously financial stresses on top of emotional stresses. 5 million paid caregivers, as we heard, and carried out by largely women of color, immigrants as well. They are underpaid, undervalued. This is invisible work. I found the average salary $23,700. Frankly, because we're living through a maelstrom of policies that could end up hurting people, adding insult to injury, the Trump administration wants to cut something like $800 billion from health care, whether Medicaid or the Affordable Care Act. I read that in Pennsylvania, 500,000 people could potentially lose their insurance because it'd be too expensive or just too complicated to navigate the bureaucracy. But the other thing this film really shows is that caregiving is the most intimate and loving thing we do for people at the beginning of life and at the end of life as well. So tonight you're going to meet some people on the front lines of care. You're going to learn about a mother who was told she was too disabled to care for her daughter and how she fought back. And we're going to begin with Barrick Goodman, who grew up here in Philadelphia. And he is producer of this documentary, co-founder of ARC Media. He's won numerous awards, including a Peabody, or several Peabodys, I believe, Emmy, Writers Guild, DuPont, Columbia, and he received an Oscar nomination as well. So let's give a big round of applause to Barrick Goodman.
Thank you.
I went to your IMDb site just to find out what you have done in terms of filmmaking, whether directing or producing or writing. Scottsboro Boys, for which you received an Oscar nomination. Oklahoma, Timothy McVeigh, Abraham Lincoln, Woodstock. It's a very eclectic, diverse list of films and TV documentaries that you've been involved in. So what got you interested in caretaking?
Well, first of all, I just want to mention, in case anyone's confused, this is an excerpt from a longer film. So in case it felt a little jumbled and moving, kind of, the film is 2 hours long and really chronicles the whole history of this and many more stories, intimate stories that are quite moving. To answer your question, this originated, actually it had sort of 2 points of origination. We had done a big series for WHYY, the sister station in Washington, on cancer. And during the course of that series, we got, the camera was always focused on the patient, right? We were embedded at Johns Hopkins. But I started to notice that the people right next to the patient were engaged in their own highly dramatic and moving and, sort of existential journey themselves, i.e. the caregivers. And some colleagues and I started talking about this would make an interesting film. It's such a vastly important issue, and it's so not talked about. It's so sort of feeling of shame around it, or privacy, or it's hidden from view, and that always entices a filmmaker. So we were interested, and at the same time, Bradley Cooper, proud Philadelphian, the actor Bradley Cooper, had approached WHYY in Washington with his own desire to make some kind of caregiving project. He had lived through a very, very harrowing experience with his own father. You think a Hollywood actor like that would have legions of aides, and I'm sure he did, but he was directly involved in the caregiving for his father and was really shaken and moved and transformed by the experience. So he went to WHYY. So we both kind of came together and decided to make this project.
We got sort of a snippet of various people's lives, and Jacob, of course, being the young son, and the very intimate moments with him and his mother. And there are other families represented as well who do seem to represent this cross-section of people whose lives are so impacted by caregiving. Was it hard to get people to open up? Because we feel so close to them. It's so intimate what they share with us.
There was a nationwide process of finding the stories, and the director of the film, Chris Durant, spent a lot of time deciding what kinds of stories to tell. He really wanted to feature the full gamut of caregiving, from children caring for parents, from people my age caring for much older parents, in some cases, unfortunately, parents caring for their children, and so on. And so we chose our stories based on roughly on that kind of a criteria. I'm sad to say that every one of the people who got care in these excerpts happen to have passed away by now. Tragically, Jacob was at an event last night in Washington for this and stole the show. But he's doing.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, he's an amazing kid. He's doing okay. But this is, of course, the story of caregiving. You do it for as long as you need to, and then you lose that person often.
I know you're not the director, but as someone who interviews people, it's like, how do you get people to open up, and you're being invited into their life in clearly difficult circumstances, but also heroic circumstances.
It's entirely about showing them that you care about them, that you've done your homework, that you know something about the subject, that you're there to bear witness to their stories. Sometimes they forget that there's about millions of people who are also going to bear witness to their stories.
Yeah.
It's about you and them, and as long as your motives are in the right place, often people are more than happy to open up, and they want to share their stories. They want to be seen, not in a sort of self-aggrandizing way. This is a tremendously lonely and isolating experience, and it's somehow validating to be seen even by a documentary filmmaker and a camera.
One of the points in the film is clearly whether it's care provided in the home or at a facility somewhere, is it seen as women's work? As someone who's been so intimately involved in that, is that how you see it?
Not at all. In fact, I am personally going through it. Since this began, my father and my mother, mostly my father, has declined precipitously, and this is the thing about caregiving. It's someone else's problem until it's yours, and then it's overwhelming. The minute it becomes yours, it becomes overwhelming, and you realize, where was I? Why didn't I know about this? Where are the choices? What do I do? I am super fortunate to have resources and to have a lot of help, and nevertheless, it's an overwhelming experience emotionally, physically, and so forth. I don't think it's just women's work. It's defaulted to women because of these ridiculous traditional stereotypes, and but many men, myself, but many men become caregivers as well. I think it naturally, women are very nurturing, and that sometimes tips it a little bit, but it really shouldn't be seen that way.
Since you mentioned it, I mean, what's this been like for you to see what your father is going through?
I mean, completely eye-opening in both great ways and very negative ways. The great ways are that you develop a whole new relationship with the person you're caring for. It's a role reversal. That's the sort of cheap way of putting it, but it's much more than that. I think we were talking about how you discover new ways of loving this person, new features. My father, who was this ferocious intellectual, a professor of law at Penn for decades, is now almost childlike, and I've become almost parental. It's beautiful. On the negative side, there just are too few resources. There's no place to put him, and as Malcolm said, they have to get so sick to get any kind of help. It's absurd, and there just aren't enough choices, aren't enough places to go for help. You have to work your way into the system, and that's really disturbing.
Yeah. I mean, we see, and I think anyone that has done this work, the intimacy, the caring, the physicality of it, the washing of the body, feeding, dressing, clothing. I mean, we do that for babies at birth, and we do that for people in need.
Definitely, and life at that time of your life narrows to a almost infinitesimally small set of concerns: your bodily functions, your food, your medication, and we as caregivers also become narrowed in those moments to those things, and we have to change the diapers, and even for our parents, and yet it's also vast and enlarging experience. As you heard in these clips, I think Malcolm said, "I'm falling more in love," and it's so it's so kind of, sort of unexpected, but it happens. It ennobles and enlarges your soul at the same time as your actual, tasks are becoming these very mundane things. So it's this curious experience,
I also really appreciate putting this whole very intimate caregiving into this historical, political context. I mean, beginning with the New Deal and the Social Security Act, where government really, maybe for the first time, really intervened in people's lives to help get them out of poverty or get them through some kind of a crisis. And, Frances Perkins deserves a face on Mount Rushmore, I think, as Secretary of Labor. I love that she was a social worker. And of course, a social worker would know what people need.
She asked, it's such an obvious thing to say, but yet needs to be said. She said, maybe government's role is to help people's lives be better.
Right.
What a concept,
Really?
And yet it was sort of revolutionary. I mean, she is in many ways the architect of that whole idea, and now that idea is absolutely under threat. And I think we sort of lost the thread of that. But she realized that government has a role to play in people's intimate lives, and a remarkable woman, truly.
And I think elder poverty was, cut dramatically just with and she did it in 6 months,
Amazing.
with the establishment of Social Security.
Yeah.
It is interesting, and we can't do justice to this history about how it toggles back and forth.
Right.
Things are given and then they're taken away. We've
Right.
got Johnson and the war on poverty with Medicare and Medicaid. Then you've got Reagan taking back, and then you've got the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then the back and forth it goes, as if this country cannot figure out what to do about caregiving.
And it's not just partisan. I mean, Clinton, ended welfare as we know it, and it was Joe Manchin, a proud Democrat in quotes, who torpedoed Biden's Build Back Better bill, and so yes, it falls more in terms of party, but there has been this tension in this country between government's idea of government helping people and the idea that this is should be private and should be the responsibility of mostly women, and it really is sort of ugly, and we don't need to look at it, and we certainly don't need to pay for it, and so there's been this tension, and it does toggle back and forth, and we have not figured it out. Other countries have, much better than we have, and they have a better quality of life as a result.
And just because Build Back Better, this was under the Biden administration, was to include caregiving as kind of part of the infrastructure.
Right.
Besides putting in, things for electric vehicles, we were going to help support caregivers. Go ahead. But
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just because it is infrastructure, it enables people to live better lives, to be more productive. It helps the economy. It is like building a fiber optic cable line in some ways. Like you solve this problem, you free people to go back and be productive in their daily lives. And Ai-jen Poo makes this point in the film, in a part we didn't see, but it's folly to not, just purely from an economic free market point of view, it's folly to not address this issue.
And she, for everyone, is a leader in this whole caregiving movement. So what do you want people to take away from this film? I mean, as I said, I cried, I got really angry. What do you want us to do?
I mean, ideally, there is some movement in terms of public policy. That's a hard thing to ask for at the moment, but little things. For example, in the state of Rhode Island right now, there is a program, a mandate that kids are asked if they are caregivers. And if they are provided extra support by the schools. Something as small as that. This doesn't require, some vast socialist takeover of government. Small things can make a big difference. Really small things, little packages. Once you qualify for hospice, hospice is a godsend. I can tell that personally in our case, but you could see it in the film. Hospice, if it could be guaranteed and expanded just a little bit, it just transforms the experience. And so again, it's not massive transformation. It's, to begin with, small steps, I think.
Yeah. There's a father, husband in this documentary caring for his wife, and he uses social media. I mean, he just, he turns to the internet to find support, to vent whatever his feelings were, but created a community for himself.
Yeah, that guy, Matt, is a great character, and you feel the isolation he felt. In that case, his wife was a young woman who had a couple of strokes because of ovarian cancer, and he suddenly had to quit his job, but his entire life was turned upside down. They had a small child, and he's not a perfect hero. He raged, he got upset, he did turn to social media and screamed and yelled, and he was not easy to work with.
No, I can
He was a little
imagine
bit,
that.
he's a kind of bitter guy, but on the other hand, it's heroic what he's done. Now his wife is doing so much better than anyone thought she
that's
would.
good.
And his son is thriving, and he spilled a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but it's paid off for him.
I know this film was made before what's happening to a lot of the safety net today.
Yeah.
I saw that there were at least plans, I don't know if it happened or not, to get rid of Meals on Wheels.
Yeah.
The SNAP program. I mean, these are the most sort of basic care that people need, and to think that they might be on the chopping block.
The social safety net is being shredded, and I don't think people realize it yet. I don't think the impact has been felt. And it's not like Trump voters don't also need this stuff.
Yeah.
And I, again, not trying to be partisan here, but I do hope that if that impact is felt, some of these decisions will be reversed.
Right.
And in fact, maybe the pendulum will swing in the other direction. That's a maybe naive view, but who knows?
Right.
You never know.
Well, it has swung before, has it
It has
not?
swung before, indeed.
So what's your next project?
Well, I'm currently working on 2 films. One is a biography of Henry Kissinger for PBS. The other is an amazing story about abuses in family court directed at women who themselves allege abuse against their spouses, and how that is flipped on them, and they are turned into the villains.
Wow.
And it's a crazy thing that's going on, and that's for a streamer that shall remain nameless at the moment because I'm not allowed to divulge, but look for it next year. It's a really amazing story.
Well, Barak Goodman, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining us.
Thank you so much for coming,
Thank
everyone.
You. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to introduce our next guest as she makes her way up to the stage here. Naya Tate Ball is founder of Legacy Empowerment Foundation. She's executive producer of Renegades, Building a Legacy, the Celestine Tate Harrington story, which aired on PBS last fall. You can watch it online, and you should, because it's incredible. It's about her extraordinary mother, a true force of nature, who was a quadriplegic. She had lost custody of Naya because the Department of Public Welfare said she was not capable of taking care of her baby daughter. She did not have the use of her arms and legs, but she did have her mouth. Celestine fought back in court. She regained custody of her child, and Naya is an advocate for affordable living for people with disabilities. Let's give her a big round of applause. And I did watch the documentary just a few days ago, and your mom is a force of nature.
For sure, absolutely.
Renegade, and what else was she?
Trailblazer. She would not take no for an answer, as you can see in the film. Just a woman filled with love, power, ferocity. There was just no quit in her. And so as a result of her being who she was, we are all now who we are. So Thank you so much for everything. First of all, Jacob in the film.
Jacob in the film,
just
yes,
about
a reference to this
in
young
tears
boy.
because I resonated so much with him.
In fact, I heard you go, as a
several
child.
times.
Yeah. Let me talk just a little bit about your mother, and then we'll talk about the sort of caregiving part of your story. So she was born in 1955, and she did not have the use of her arms and legs. So something had happened
Yes.
to create that? Do you know?
No, not really. I don't really know the full story of that. But yes, when she was born, she had arms and legs. They
Right.
were just kind of deformed. And so she didn't have the ability to use her arms or her legs, and she was born that way.
Did she go to school? No, she was born in 1955.
In the 50s, yeah.
Yeah.
So she did go to school, not traditional school. She went to school for handicapped children. She also attended the English House and other school. She considered them schools, but she didn't have any formal education at all. So
We meet a little bit of your family, it's a fierce family.
oh my goodness,
Yeah.
they are here.
That might be an understatement.
Yes, absolutely. And so my aunt is here. Her sister Tammy.
Where's your aunt?
Over there.
Oh, there you are.
Auntie's always there. My daughter is also here in the
Oh,
room. Celestine,
great.
who's named after my mother, is also a force to be reckoned with.
Very
Honestly,
good.
her namesake. Yeah, and so honestly, my mother was the beginning of our legacy, I feel, and we are all continuing her legacy on today.
She gave
I have a
birth to-
sister also too. I have a sister. She lives in North Carolina, and she has 3 children as well. And so we're all a tight unit.
Yeah, talk about legacy, right?
Oh yes,
Right.
for sure.
So when you were born, the Department of Public Welfare decided
Yeah.
that your mother could not take care of you.
Yep. Yep.
They took you from her.
Had absolutely nothing to do with her ability to care for me. I wasn't being neglected.
Right.
None of that was happening. They just felt that, they made the decision that because she was disabled that they could come into our home and take me. And so it was a very difficult time for my whole entire family. But, if you can imagine what life must have been like her before I was born, right? You probably never think that you're going to get married. You don't feel normal. You don't feel like you'll ever be accepted by society, and then you have a baby that you fall in love with. And I was 6 months old when they came into the home. So
Well, I
they
was
didn't,
wondering how old you were, so.
yeah, they didn't take me immediately. So 6 months later, after getting to know this baby and falling in love with this baby, they come in and they just took me out of the home. And
Where did you go? Do you know?
they had me with, first I was down at DHS, wherever they take those children. I really don't know. And then I was with a family very shortly during the court proceedings. And but the thing about it is I had a family.
Right.
I had my grandparents, I had my aunts, I had my uncles, we had a support system. So that's why we kind of feel like it was targeted. She was, kind of targeted for her condition. But so she went to court, and she presiding was Judge Edward Rosenberg, who was also a force
Of nature?
oh my goodness, a force of nature, but also a very kind heart. I had the pleasure of linking up with him much later in life,
nice.
just to thank him for making the decision that he made. And
Well, she took on DPW. She said, I want my daughter back.
oh, she did. She went to court and literally changed my diaper with her mouth in the courtroom.
And that was sort of like, can you take care of this child? And this
Watch
was,
this.
And she said, well, and
Oh,
you-
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, but my mother was always very theatrical. That's where we all get it from. And so she said, if you want to show, I'm going to give you one. But no, that was her way of showing the world that she could do anything than any other mother could do. She just had to do it differently. And it's just like, with education, we all learn differently. We all do things differently. And when you are born with a disability, you may not be able to do things the way other people do things, but it doesn't mean that you're not capable or able to do it. And she just went to court and just proved that fact.
She was also very media savvy. She kind of knew how to play the
Oh my,
media, if I can put it that way.
She was an influencer before influencers were influencers. I'm telling you that.
Yeah.
And what occurred is she leveraged the Jet magazine and other media sources in order to get publicity, in order to get me back. And it was the people. It the people of the city of Philadelphia who knew she received a raw deal. And so when you have enough people rallying behind you and speaking up for you and campaigning for you, you know, she just needed that energy behind her, and she did what she needed to do. And Judge Edward Rosenberg, literally, the other day somebody sent me some audio of the action of her in the courtroom. Like, I'm about to be 50 years old, all of these years later, and to hear my mother's voice and hear her advocate. So my mother has since passed away, and we may get to that, but to hear her advocating for me all that long ago, and it was just something to hear.
Yeah. So you're a child
So she
being
won
raised by
custody.
your mom. So help us understand, I guess, the back and forth caregiving that happened with you and your mom.
Absolutely. So it was not an easy thing. So if you think about it, she won, so she could not lose in front of people, right? So she couldn't always share that she needed help, and wouldn't always share that she needed support, because she was afraid that if she showed the least bit of vulnerability, that I would be taken again.
Right.
And so a lot of times, you know, we lived in circumstances where, you know, it was very difficult. You know, my mother was charged with caring for me as the mother, but from my earliest memories, I was the caregiver to her.
Right.
Yeah, and so Jacob, hence,
This is
you
the
know,
young boy in the film, yeah.
Jacob in the film, I just resonated with him so much because I understood what it meant to, you know, you want the source of normalcy. People think that because you have a parent with a disability or a parent that's ill or sick, that there's something wrong with you, you know what I mean? And then even, you know, going to school and getting on the school bus, there were times when I was late to school or absent from school a lot. And most people assume automatically that that's just neglect, or, you know, they just didn't get this kid to school on time. But there were so many different circumstances going on at home that required me to care for her. If she had a doctor's appointment, a lot of times we would go to, you know, bathing her, dressing her. You know, I had to learn from my aunt. My mother was a female, so we had to learn how to take care of her feminine hygiene.
Right.
And I'm a little girl learning these things. And so, you know, but it's normal. You know, it's not like we're trying to do it or you're in a role. You are living life like you know it.
I mean, did you say to yourself, my mom is disabled? How did you think about her? I feel like she didn't think of herself as having a disability.
She never did, honestly. I never, even from, you know, dressing her or cooking with her, she had an uncanny knack to be able to make us feel powerful and normal and just in the moment, right? And so, like, learning to dress her legs were kind of contorted. So everything she taught us in a game, right? Or if we had to go to the grocery store, she would teach us in a song, right? So I had to go to the grocery store and I had to remember the list, right? So we would learn that in a song. My mother could type 45 words a minute with her mouth. My mother could sew. My mother pierced my ears.
Oh my gosh.
But I don't know, who's here dated enough to know back in the day when they would put a needle through the ear?
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
then after they put a needle through the ear, they'd take a little piece of the broomstick off. Yeah, this is so unsanitary now that I think about it. But all of this.
You survived.
I lived. But my mother was able to do all of those things. And, you know, some of the things that I can remember, you know, when it came to caregiving is, you know, learning to cook, right? Yeah. So spaghetti was my first meal to learn to cook. And you would not, you can't imagine how many pots of spaghetti ended up on the floor, right? They call me clumsy to this day. But it was because I was learning at such a young age to do it. But now I'm a phenomenal cook.
I bet. Mm-hmm. I mean, as a child, did you resent this? Were there times when you just wanted to live like other children? Did you allow yourself that?
No, because other children wanted to be me. Like, to
oh,
be
okay, there you go.
Well, you know what? My mom, That's what I'm saying. Like we never knew that we were not like everybody else. It was just natural. We just were who we were. And my mother was a source of a resource for other people, honestly. And she was an advocate for disabilities, way back when. And so people often reached out to her for resources. Sometimes I felt like she was too available to other people, right? But that was her calling. And then as a caregiver, what ultimately happens with caregivers, and I see it as I look at certain individuals in my family, is once you become a caregiver, you can't turn it off, right? And so
I hear some yeses in the audience.
You start caregiving even when people don't need care.
Right.
And
How about taking care of yourself?
Oh, and then you never do that,
Right.
right? Because you are so conditioned to care and take care of everybody else that you often leave yourself as last. I never noticed that I did that until I was at a conference once, and they assigned every group in the conference a role or a turn to do something, and innately I just let everybody go first. And the person running the conference recognized that, and they asked me, "Do you always put yourself last?" And I did and I didn't realize that I was doing that, but I did that because I just it's just in me.
Your mom was a musician. She was a street performer. She played a keyboard.
Yes, she did.
With her tongue and
With
her
tongue.
mouth. And for a time, she went to Atlantic City, where she performed on the boardwalk there. And according to
Absolutely.
this documentary, she was making $1,000 a day.
At times.
times.
I feel like
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Listen, my mother was honestly an entrepreneur. We heard in this story so many individuals that faced financial insecurity, housing insecurities, not being able to pay your bills, being able to make ends meet. And just like everybody else, we face that too. But my mother was determined not to fully depend on, the resources that just were not readily there. And so, in the summer times, Memorial Day weekend, she would clean up. Yes, she
I
would.
bet she would.
But she saw what she was doing as working. She felt like that was her work, that was her job. And I'm going to tell you something. On those days on that boardwalk in Atlantic City, my mother served so many people. She inspired so many people walking up and down that boardwalk, having just gone in the casino and probably lost every dime they had, came out with a woe is me kind of thing. What am I going to do? How am I going to survive? How am I going to move forward with life? And she would speak to everyday people and inspire them to continue putting one foot in front of the other. Why? Because they had feet.
Yeah.
Right? You have to count your blessings. She was the epitome of gratitude and grace. And so for us, and the way we looked at that was service. And a lot of people that encountered her, they would tell you, they would leave a conversation from my mother feeling like they could conquer the world.
Wow.
Because if you are in that condition, if you are disabled like that, and you are able to get up every single day and smile and care for people and take care of people and help people, then there is no reason why an able-bodied person should not do the same. And so that's just who she was and how
And she wrote a memoir.
She did.
She wrote a book. And in this documentary, it's wonderful. Howard Stern interviews her.
Oh, she got with Howard, didn't she?
I mean, she disarmed him and charmed him.
She really did. She had a way of working a room. My mother could identify the strengths, the weaknesses of every person that she encountered, and she knew how to play that, right? So yeah, pretty remarkable.
Hearing you talk and also watching the documentary, I was wondering if she were alive today and had to testify at a congressional committee, like what would happen?
Okay. So she'd start with this very infant-like angelic voice, right? She would charm the pants off of the people, right? And they would get them to a point where they're kind of feeling sorry for her, and then she would nail them, honestly. And she would, just with her mouth, with her words, with her voice, speak to the disadvantages and speak to, you know, and she would make them feel ashamed at, you know, the lack of resources and the lack of support for caregivers and for individuals with disabilities. But at the same time, she would encourage them.
Right.
And inspire them and urge them. She had a way of literally urging people to do the right thing.
Wow. When did she die then? How long ago was that?
So I count this up by my daughter's age. Every time Celeste turns another year, it's another year that my mom's been gone. And so she passed away in 1998. She was in a car accident.
Oh.
Mom had finally gotten her independence. And so she got a motorized gurney. And she was able to, transport herself. Because prior to that, she was on a gurney and people had to take her from one place to another. And so she finally had gotten her independence, and she was hit by a cab. Yeah,
I'm so
and that knocked her
sorry.
into a car. And so she lived for 6 days. And then, like on the 6th day, I went in and, had a conversation with her. And I told her, this is too hard and too difficult. I'm okay. You did your job.
Oh, wow.
I got it. I'll take it from here. And so now we're continuing her legacy on. But the interesting thing is, right before my mom passed away, we lived in so many different places that didn't have, heat, hot water sometimes. I mean, nobody here in this audience can resonate with this, but there were times when we had to put water on the stove to boil it, to have hot water at times, or open up the oven, right? Because it was a little cold, and you feel me? And so toward the end of her life, we didn't know this was going to be the end, but she purchased a condominium, 2 of them. And this is what sparked the real estate bug in me. I watched my mother purchase 2 condos, and then I watched my aunt purchase a duplex. And after I watched the 2 of them, I said, wait a minute. I looked at my husband, I said, honey, this might be something we need to do. And so since then we started, working in real estate and building, a real estate empire, essentially.
Right. And also working on, I guess, affordable housing for people with disabilities.
Yes, and the thing that I'm most proud about is we are partnering, and we are about to build a 116-unit apartment building where we will be providing affordable and accessible housing. But in the Fort Worth, Texas area, thank you
for that.
so much. And so we are, we also have our new foundation. It's called the Legacy Empowerment Foundation. And what we do in our foundation is we help individuals and teach individuals with disabilities, or even caregivers, or individuals who are confined to their homes for whatever reason, how to invest in real estate virtually without ever leaving the comforts of their home. And so it's always about empowering. It's always about teaching people alternative ways to still conquer whatever their situation is.
Yeah. Well, you do your mother proud.
Oh,
Thank you
so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Naya, Tate, Paul. All right, now we're going to hear from some providers who are on the front lines of this caregiving crisis. And just a couple of facts and figures here. According to the Columbia University School of Public Health, half of states are on the brink of a caregiving emergency. Here in Pennsylvania, 500,000 residents, as I mentioned, could lose their health insurance. We are, as we know, an aging population. People are living longer. And as we age, chances are we're going to need care. 10,000 people turn 65 every day. 4 million babies are born every year. We don't have paid family leave, so we've got things at the beginning of life and things at the end of life that need to be addressed. So what are the services that exist? What are the challenges that organizations who work with caregivers face as we look at the beginning and the end of life? And we have 3 guests who have joined us. Sitting next to me here is Cheryl Clark Woods, Director of the Caregiver Support Program at the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging. And next to her is Christine DiBona Lobley. She is Executive Director of Fred's Footsteps, named for her father, who was a philanthropist and businessman, providing care and support for families with children with complex health needs. And next to her, Melanie O'Brien, Director of Communications for Easterseals of Southeastern Pennsylvania, providing services for children with special needs, including developmental delays and disabilities. So thank you all three for joining us. And let me just start with an overall question, and perhaps I'll toss this first to you, Melanie, which is, what does this crisis look like to you? I think we know what it is. I think we've defined a lot of the features of it. What does it look like to you to be in the trenches?
Well, at Easterseals, we're meeting families at the beginning of their journey. You know, having a baby in and of itself is, nothing. But then navigating any sort of disability or need is overwhelming, and we're meeting families still kind of in the grief process of what life was going to look like and now what it does look like, and helping to manage that. We meet families kind of on their journey. Sometimes it's in the community, providing evaluations or services from birth to 3 and helping parents navigate different therapeutic needs and teaching them, and then helping as the process goes on, center-based and educational and therapeutic, as well as the social work component of accessing and the challenges of day-to-day living.
Yeah, making the system work, right?
It's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. Let me turn to you, Cheryl, talking about the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging. So we're talking about people at the end of life, and we have been talking about caregiving. What do you see as the sort of overriding caregiving challenges?
We get calls every day from caregivers, and even, out there in the greeting space today, people coming and telling their stories and the challenges with accessing resources or unavailable resources, or how to navigate the system, because there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of different eligibility for different programs, and caregivers really aren't understanding about how to get services for their loved one, and frequently have no clue, essentially, about what supports are available to them, which are very limited.
So even if they got support, it's limited?
It's very limited. We're a special unique program, which is throughout Pennsylvania, the Caregiver Support Program. But really, the criteria limits people even accessing our services. There's multiple programs, and those programs really need to bring in caregiver direct supports into the program to provide comprehensive supports to them and respite that they really need. That is lacking currently in the system makeup as it is.
I mean, as we see in this film, it's a 24/7 responsibility when you're caring for someone in home, whether a parent or a child.
And it is, and it strikes you when you watch the film that they're centered about their loved one. They're speaking about their loved one the whole time, and they're not talking about necessarily their personal needs. And what you do hear them say is how much this experience, is meaningful. And, we often think caregiving can be challenging and difficult, and that's the other side of the coin to that, the meaning. But they often forget themselves in the picture, and part of what we try to do is, and part of the National Caregiving Strategy is to recognize caregivers, to bring awareness to them, and to really try to identify needs, even if we have to be creative in that endeavor.
Melanie, let me go to you, because you also provide, with Fred's Footsteps, support for caregivers.
Yes. So at Fred's Footsteps, our focus is on...
Sorry, Christine.
Christine, that's
sorry,
okay.
Sorry.
Our focus is on families caring for medically complex children. So, oftentimes that looks a lot different, whether caregivers are parents, grandparents, single moms, and our goal is that a child's health should be a parent's only worry. And I think that's always the goal for caregiving, is that should be your sole focus. And unfortunately, there aren't as many resources as there need to be. There's not as many systems in place as there needs to be. So if we can step in and make a time easier for a family financially so that they can put the focus back on caregiving for their child, our goal is to take that financial worry away during a critical point during their child's illness, so that they can do what they need to do to focus on that.
I mean, what comes across is that everyone is going to need caregiving at some point in their life. Chances are you're going to be a caregiver at some point in your life, and yet we have a system that's so complicated. Maybe I'm back to you, Christine. This is so complicated to make it work, to give people not just the sort of minimum, but what it is that they really need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that unfortunately we're living in times where people are in survival mode, and the ability to thrive is not attainable for a lot of families. And there's, an acronym that we use a lot at Fred's Footsteps. It's ALICE, asset limited income constrained but employed. And they're families that are making they're making more than the federal poverty level, but they're not making enough money to sustain their everyday living expenses. So in Philadelphia, that number is about $88,000 for a family of four. So I mean, we looked and we saw, in the film that, a CNA or might be making home health aid $23,000.
Yeah, right.
So if one or both parents leaves work, or if they're adding that $7,200 in extra caregiving expenses, something's got to give. People aren't making choices. They're not making bad choices. They're making the only choices they have, which happen to be terrible choices when they're caregiving.
Yeah, and Alice, asset limited, income constrained, but employed. I mean, is that the working poor?
It's the working poor, yeah. So it's a study that came out of the United Way in Northern Jersey, I believe. And it's really just looking at that population and they don't have a lot of upward mobility in terms of employment. So their salaries oftentimes aren't keeping up with inflation, and with housing costs and inflation, that number keeps getting higher for what people need to just maintain the basics of living.
Melanie, I'm also thinking about children that need some kind of complicated medical childcare, whether it's, some form of autism or whether it's a physical disability. And I'm thinking of a family with a child, and you're waiting to get into a place.
The options are terribly limited, is an understatement. So medically complex needs, it's very hard to come by that type of care. And then when there's challenging behaviors, in my role, I have the opportunity to speak with families and kind of share their story. And they talk about having this wonderful daycare experience with their first child, and then they, go to the same daycare, and just the turn when they have a child who's got these really complex behaviors and challenging behaviors, that they're distraught, having to give up work and rethink their lives, and it's exhausting. So it's not only work, but there's a respite component to it, being able to go to work a little bit, and how much is involved in that type of care with those behaviors or medical needs.
One or two, and I'm back to you, Cheryl, about respite care. I mean, how much is that available to caregivers?
So it is limited. There is respite available through some of the Medicaid programs, the community-based programs, and through our program as well. Though it's extremely limited, there is actually, I saw Pen Memory here, a new program which is a pilot nationally, which is the GUIDE program, and hopefully that will give some respite relief to caregivers who are caring for someone with some form of dementia, which would be covered under Medicare.
Oh, wow.
And, that is a promising, concept in the context of what we know is that caregivers need respite. They need time for themselves. They need time away from caregiving, and they need that relief. And it's really key for them to get that so they can maintain their own physical, emotional well-being, give them time to, care for their own children if they're caring for an elder, And it's just essential. It is lacking for sure, and really, truly a needed area.
Christine, let me go back to you, because I'm thinking in a number of these families, you've got a special needs child, and there might be other children. And, you know, with so much focus on a child that needs a lot of care and attention, what happens to those siblings?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and there's not enough programs out there to help with the siblings as well. You know, and I think that the siblings sometimes become caregivers. They sometimes take on their parents' grief and pain. And, you know, I remember we had one family where the mom said, you know, I tried as hard as I could not to let them see it, but I know they saw it. And it's really challenging for them as well, because they're dealing with their own process of wanting to just be kids who are cared for by their parents as well. And the parents, to that point, with the respite as well. I think there's a juggling act as well to try and, you know, divide your attention as much possible when you know that one child is getting a lot more attention due to their health needs. You know, how do they balance that? And in the end, as a caregiver, they choose not to care for themselves either, and their own health is put at risk.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Melanie, just thinking about Easterseals?
Yeah, we have sib shops that are designed to kind of support siblings and create an opportunity to be with their peers who will understand their experiences. But again, it's one of those underfunded, you know, there's a lack of awareness, but our social workers are tireless in kind of meeting all of these different needs, and it's there. But again, it's the funding and the opportunity for them to do this, because it is such a, you don't think about how big and the reach of caregiving is, that it's holistic.
I mean, how do you feel now? I mean, it feels as if so much is under assault. You're working in an area of care and service that feels very chaotic and very questionable. And I wonder, how do you deal with that, Cheryl?
It's, you know, there are certainly uncertain times. You know, we are grappling with, you know, our programs are funded through the Older Americans Act, which rely on federal funding, which was under the Administration for Community Living, which is no longer a department.
It was eliminated?
It has been assumed under the Health and Human Services.
Okay.
So when, you know, there is changing programming in that way, and some of the programs under the Older Americans Act are being threatened, not to go into that from my perspective, but you know, those things are available if you want to take a look at them. But something certainly for all of us who are advocating for not only older adult services, but children and adult with a disability, that these services definitely are at risk, and that we should be aware of it.
Yeah. How about for you, Christine? Just sort of living in this very uncertain times.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's we have to focus on what we can do as nonprofits, and I think unfortunately, you know, there's also a lot of pressure on us to pick up slack where we're a lot smaller than the government and then the states. So it's kind of a reverse in saying, you know, the supports are at nonprofits when you know, our budgets don't show that kind of support there. But I think just that there's a lot of fear and panic from the families that we serve, particularly around Medicaid, and there's just so much noise out there, and I think that it's only going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. And you know, as we talked about a little bit, you know, hopefully the pendulum goes the other way. But you know, for now, it's just being there where we can be there and supporting the families that we can support, making that difference for them, and then, you know, hoping that some of the advocacy work that many organizations are doing will make some change.
Yeah, Melanie, you want to add to that? I mean, I'm thinking of people working on the front lines, but I'm thinking, of course, of families that are trying to figure out how to get what they
Our-
need.
They're advocating. I mean, it's caregivers are amazing advocates. They earn it, and they are extraordinary at it. So watching our families advocate and collaborate, and we can engage them when we have opportunities. Independently, they're doing it. They're such a powerful community, and so watching the families that we serve and do come together, and I mean, it's an amazing, strong group of people.
Yeah. I'm thinking too that there are, I mean, families come in so many different forms, but I don't know whether it's unique for caregiving families that they become are intergenerational. You're nodding your head, Christine.
Yeah, we see a lot of that, especially more recently, where there's more multi-generational houses. You know, and it's a good thing and a bad thing in some ways, but you know, mostly having that support there is good. But the reason why they're doing it is because housing is so wildly unaffordable. So you know, they're doing it out of necessity, and a lot of times for the kids we see, there's medical equipment, there's nurses, if they can even get a nurse, which is a whole other issue with the nursing shortage. And their needs, their basic needs are being met, but again, it's not a situation where they're thriving, where there's enough space. So when you have multiple people and multiple generations in a small apartment because that's all they can afford, that's
Stressful.
It's
to say the
stressful.
least.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you found that to be true as well, Cheryl?
Absolutely. You know, one thing that came to mind is just the many faces of caregivers, and one population and group that really near and dear to our heart, whom we serve, are older relatives, grandparents raising children in the absence of their parents.
Right.
So that's just another category of caregivers. So just thinking in the context of, you know, the different roles that caregivers have, and the multiple roles, not only intergenerational, which we see all the time in our work, but I'm caring for my husband, I might be caring for, you know, a child with a disability or someone with mental health, and, you know, we talk about our families in that way, and we just, I think for the longest time, and it's been talked about, is that we haven't recognized ourselves as caregivers and our own needs within those roles. So I think that's the importance of today.
And is it true that women largely are doing this, or are we seeing men as well? I mean, I don't want to make broad statements about who's actually providing this care, but Melanie, from your own experience.
I think it's fair to say that it's
It is fair to say
primarily
that,
women,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
I mean,
And
there's
is
the
that just
exception.
because that's the way it's always been, or way families are structured, or?
I mean, if you look at the socioeconomic, I mean, there's the pay scale, there's the nurturing, there's the cultural expectation, or, you know, society. So all of those things brought together, it's the default.
Right.
And of course, there's exceptions, there's greater participation, but in general, yeah.
Right. I mean, does that explain why we're still struggling to make a system viable? It's women's
I would
work?
argue probably, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's fair to say that, sure.
You agree, Christine?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, most of the time when we see families, it's mom who has stepped down from their employment to care for the child. Not always, again, and there's
Right.
a lot of, you know, reasons why, you know, the pay gap, all of that, but we mostly see that it's women who leave the workforce to care for a medically complex child.
I do want to get to some solutions because we're kind of piling on problems here, but this is the world that we live in. But let me go back to you, Melanie. We're here in Philadelphia. There's potential for cutbacks for public transportation, for SEPTA, which, you know, gets people around the city.
And-
What are your fears?
I mean, there's huge fear, and I can speak a little bit. The disability community in Philadelphia is collaborating and connecting and rallying and trying to make changes, but the access to caregivers coming in, or, you know, that use public transportation, or to access resources that they need that are outside of Philadelphia, the curfews that will limit the amount of home health care workers coming in, and fare hikes for disproportionately underpaid people, that it just is, and it will affect the entire state. It's not just this area. I mean, it will affect the whole flow of it.
Sure,
That it's
sure.
a very serious.
Indeed, indeed. And Cheryl, do you want to add to that? I mean, from maybe an older person's perspective, trying to navigate a transit system as good as it is when it's functioning, I mean, imagine less services.
Yeah, and it's accessing healthcare, it's reducing isolation, you know, all those factors that are incredibly important for people to enter and be engaged in the community. And it will be a significant problem if it doesn't get resolved.
Right.
I'm
Right.
not sure what is, you know, exactly happening in way of that, but the impact is undeniable.
Yeah. Let me go back to you, Melanie, because I know that you have talked a little bit, something called the service cliff. So people get services up until, what, 18 or 21?
21.
21, and then,
It's over.
And it's over.
So access to services, you're entitled to public education through 21 with a disability, and then once that's over, there's no access. There's waiver services that are happening, but again, filling those positions and getting that care, you know, having it all come together is really challenging. We're all competing for skilled caregivers and in a tough field, and it's isolating, and it's just stops. And the
Yeah.
funding, we've lost most of our recreational programming. It's one of the first things to go because it's not funded. It relies heavily on public support, and public support tends to now cover the gap in funding for a lot of stuff.
well, as this film shows, and I think as our discussion has been, is this, who's responsible for caregiving? Is it the family? Is it, you know, the family unit, the individual, or is it the larger society? And I think you've done an excellent job describing the problem. I'm looking at you, Christine, about sort of how do we dig ourselves out of this? Sorry to put that on your shoulders
yeah,
there.
That's exactly it. I mean, I hear from right there.
What was that?
At this point, increase the pay rate. At this point, you know, we're in a position where by 2030, there's going to be a shortage of at least 1 million nurses. And that's just nurses. That's not CNAs, home health aides. We are in a dire position. And the reason that they're leaving is because of burnout and stress, but also because they need to be paid better in all these caregiving services. You know, we often talk about the Alice families that I already talked about, and they're the people who during the pandemic we called heroes and we got them stickers and
clapped for them,
we
right?
clapped for them, and now we've largely abandoned them and have not better paid family leave. You know, paying parents as caregivers at a fair rate. Those are all things that if we're gonna move towards solving this problem, that we need to prioritize.
How about for you, Cheryl?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think insurance coverage also is an added need for the direct care workforce out there. We do have programs that allow for paying of family caregivers, and that's really important, especially with complex situations. If someone has dementia, sometimes it's difficult, or, you know, difficult situations. Having a known relative or loved one is really super important. So expanding those programs, I think, is super important to try to, you know, maybe offset the direct care workforce reliance. And we know grandchildren and others are, you know, the best people to provide care.
Right,
So,
for the person that they know and love.
absolutely.
Last word from you, Melanie.
Pay rate. I mean, it's
Money.
It's paying people and increasing access to services. I mean, the waiting list for any type of service is so long, and it's because of so many things. Access to a support person that allows that child to come into our services, and if we just paid people for the work, you know, if it was funded properly.
Well, thank you, all three of you. Thank you for the work you do and the people that work with you and the caregivers as well. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming out and joining us. And thank you again for the work you do. Thank you. Great.